After World War II, Russia began expanding its communist government throughout Eastern Europe, Central Asia, North Korea, and the Middle East. It created the Soviet Union, an empire of communism in Eastern Europe. At the same time, the U.S. began expanding its capitalist government throughout Western Europe, Japan, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. In 1945, relations between U.S. President John F. Kennedy and Russia got worse. The U.S. wanted to stop the Soviet Union from further expansion. Both countries aimed to gain more allies through the UN at this time. It became obvious that a war was approaching. By 1960, both the US and the Soviet Union had large arsenals of nuclear weaponry in preparation for the Cold War. The Cold War was not really a war in the sense that there were no battles fought, but it was a war of politics. Both countries used the weaponry as a deterrent for war. One of the most important parts of the war was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis nearly created the world's first nuclear battle. In 1961, America attempted to take over Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. This led Cuban dictator Fidel Castro to ally with the Soviet Union and become influenced by the Soviet Union's socialist ideology. In July 1962, the Soviets took advantage of Cuba's proximity to the United States by planting missiles in Cuba. This also served Cuba's interest because the missiles offered them protection from another attack from the United States. Cuba did not attack with missile strikes because America had a stronger army and they were afraid of a counterattack. At the same time, America did not invade Cuba to disarm the missiles for the fear of the Soviet leader Khrushchev using it as a justification for an expansion of the Soviet Union through a potential World War III. Instead, the U.S. responded to the nuclear threat with a naval blockade on Cuba. The USSR argued that the blockade was unlawful, but they were unable to do anything about it. On September 23, 1962, Kennedy signed the quarantine order under which, among other steps to prevent Cuban missile attacks, the U.S. would increase surveillance on Cuba, the U.S. would defend any country in the Western Hemisphere, mostly democratic countries, from Cuban missile attack, and Kennedy asked the Soviet leader to try to preserve world peace. The UN leader U Thant proposed a compromise under which the U.S. would suspend the naval blockade and the USSR would stop its shipment of nuclear arms to Cuba. This deal was accepted by the Soviet Union, but rejected by Kennedy because the compromise did not force Cuba to get rid of the missiles that it already possessed. On October 26, 1962, Khrushchev offered to remove the missiles from Cuba if the U.S. agreed not to invade Cuba. On October 27, 1962, Khrushchev also demanded that the U.S. remove its nuclear weaponry from Turkey before the Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba. The U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy made no note of the second part of the agreement, but agreed upon the first part with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin. On October 28, 1962, the Soviet leader publicly announced his plans to remove nuclear arms from Cuba, thus ending the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis teaches us that conflicts can be settled without the use of military strength, but rather with compromise. I think that if more of the world's battles were fought like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world could be a much more peaceful place. Though one of the largest empires in recent history, the Soviet Union was bound to collapse eventually. This collapse began on March 1985 when Mikhail Gorbachev succeeded Chernenko as the head of the Soviet Party. The first reason of the collapse was that Gorbachev created a more open political system. For example, in 1988 he held elections for the legislature of the Soviet Party for the first time since the beginning of the Soviet Union. The second reason was that he made the Soviet economy more capitalist. Under his rule, the government stopped controlling the economy, and he initiated a free market similar to the one in the United States today. The third reason was that he believed that countries had the right to choose their political systems. In 1989, due to Gorbachev's last claim and their unhappiness with the communist government, many countries began leaving the Soviet Union to become independent states. Gorbachev did not use military force to keep the Soviet Union intact. Instead, he allowed the other countries to leave. The military, the KGB, or the Soviet secret police, and other conservative communists were getting fed up with Gorbachev's democratic rule. The military took over the government in August 1991. On August 18, 1991, the military forced Gorbachev into house arrest. Ultimately, though, the military coup failed. With no Soviet leader, Russian President Yeltsin, who was against Soviet imperialism, actually gained power. He coordinated the collapse of the Soviet Union with Belarus and Ukraine. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet Union was disbanded. 15 independent states took the place of the empire.